Hello. Today I'd like to take some time to talk to parents who are wondering whether their child, who seems to show signs of autism or developmental delay or disorder, should get a diagnosis or not. First, I will explain the situation of how a developmental disability diagnosis is made. I am not an expert, so I do not make diagnoses myself. But in the case of my child, after receiving many diagnoses and looking at the diagnosis results, I could guess that this is how the diagnosis is made. My child officially received a diagnosis in Korea in 2000 at the age of 5, and after that underwent several more evaluations. Even after coming to Canada, we had several more assessments done. When I looked at the results from those assessments, it seemed that they evaluated how far behind our child was compared to average people in various areas. So for example, if you think of it as a normal distribution, so the average could be in a specific area like social skills or language and communication or cognition. Various areas like these are scored. It's not like taking an X-ray to see if there's something wrong inside the body. Instead, we interview the parents, observe how the child plays, and communicate with the child to assess their communication skills by having them do various activities. So we look at how well the child performs these tasks, and then we assign a score. By assigning this score, for example, if the average is around 50, and our child is somewhere on a scale from 0 to 100, then in some areas our child might fall into, say, the 3rd percentile. In other areas, they might fall into the 0 percentile. In this way, after assigning scores for each area, all of these are combined to make a diagnosis. Now, some children have low scores across all areas, but there are also children who actually score higher in certain areas. So, there's that kind of story. People say that Einstein and others actually had some autistic traits. They might have been weaker in social skills, but showed remarkable genius in certain specific areas. Just like that, each child may be stronger in some fields and weaker in others. But the area that is commonly lower, especially in cases of autism or developmental disorders, is usually the social domain. So in my view, having lower social skills seems to be the most common and noticeable phenomenon. In the end, a diagnosis is made based on how far someone deviates from the average. So then the real issue becomes where to draw the line between whether someone has autism or not. Then the question is, who decides where that line is? Honestly, I don't know whether it's right to draw the line here or there. What criteria are used to determine whether someone has autism or not? For example, let's say this is the standard for having autism. But autism in English is called Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD. The S there stands for spectrum, which means that it spans a wide range. So for example, let's say the diagnosis for autism starts from here. From this point, then how much difference is there really between someone here and someone over there? I don't think it's something that can be clearly divided like that. So now, after coming to Canada, I found out that in order to receive government support here, you need to have some kind of official diagnosis. Only then will the government provide assistance, because they need to establish criteria. But from what I've heard, before 2008, it seems that there was enough budget allocated to support developmental disabilities. Before 2008, so they thought it would be okay to set the cutoff at around 10%, but then the financial crisis happened in 2008. As a result, things became difficult across the board. So of course the budget was reduced. That's why they lowered the diagnostic criteria for support from 10% to 5%. So originally they intended to provide support up to this level, but since there was no budget, they decided to only support up to here. As a result, the people who were in the middle, those individuals, ended up not receiving any support. These are what we commonly refer to as high-functioning or so-called high-functioning autism, and those friends fall into this category. So at first, the support was focused mainly on those with more severe conditions. But the problem with these friends is that if, like neurotypical peers, they graduate, get a job, and have no social issues, then there's no problem. However, up until they graduate high school, things are okay because they're still attending school, but after graduation, they have nowhere to go. They can't go on to college, but it's not like they get a job or have friends to hang out with and go out together. So what happens is that they end up staying at home all day. Naturally, many parents and people here would say, we need help too. So after a lot of appeals, eventually a budget was created to support those with high-functioning autism. Here in Vancouver, BC, they refer to people in this group under the category called DD, developmental disability. Then, since they started providing support to people in this group, they named it PSI to distinguish it. Personalized Support Initiative. It's a bit of a difficult term. So that's how this group was formed. So now we've come to this point. So this PSI group received relatively less funding than this DD group. And since these guys need more help, they will probably be allocated more of the budget. But after doing this, the question arises, what happens to this group then? And that's about 12%. Among the people in this 10 to 12% range, some are able to progress normally, but quite a few are not able to move forward. Among the many people I've met, there are those who graduated from college with a bachelor's degree and did well academically. There are also friends who have completed their master's degrees. And there are some people who say they were diagnosed at the age of 40. What are these people like? In my view, they are very close to being completely normal. Some of them, especially among those with autism, have excellent memorization skills and do very well academically because they have good concentration in certain areas. But their social skills are lacking. These friends graduated from college, and since they did well academically, they also got jobs. I got a job, so I went there and interacted with people, and there were various instructions given to me. They found those things difficult. There was even someone who had completed graduate school but struggled to understand how to print or make copies, and was troubled by it. So while they may be outstanding in certain fields, they can be extremely lacking in others, which makes it hard for them to last even 6 months at a job, or they end up getting fired again. This happens quite often. So these people formed a group. There is such a group in Canada, and in this kind of society, there are parents who say, our children don't really belong to the group that receives government support, nor do they fit into living a typical life, so they're really struggling here. So what these people do when they gather is to demand government support for themselves as well. So they ask for something to be done so that they can do more for their children with this support. And here, there are many people called self-advocates who assert their own rights on their own. In the past, they didn't know why they were the way they were, but after doing various research in their 30s or 40s, they realized that many of their traits were very similar to the symptoms described in autism. So sometimes they even request a diagnosis themselves. So after getting checked, they find out that they show autistic tendencies in certain areas. And there are people who say that it was only then that they understood why things had been so difficult for them. So rather than feeling despair, some people actually think, that's why it was so hard for me, and feel a sense of understanding. A very representative case comes to mind. This person was the one who experienced it. The person in question was in their late 30s and called me once. They asked me to explain their characteristics to their parents. The reason was that this person had even earned a master's degree in the United States. They are also very articulate. However, even while attending school, they continued to receive psychiatric counseling because they kept developing obsessions and compulsions about certain subjects. So eventually they returned home and now live in Vancouver, Canada, but naturally there was a lot of conflict with their parents. During that time, so when I asked which part was difficult, this person said what was hard for them was the trash, the recycling, You have to recycle here, and regular trash and recyclables have to be separated. But for example, if a family member, like their mother, puts something that should be recycled into the regular trash can, that's really hard for them. It's so difficult that it's almost unbearable. So when they ask their parents not to do that, the parents instead criticize them, saying things like, why are you so sensitive about something like this? Or you have such a peculiar personality. So even though it's unbearably hard for them, they get blamed instead. Another thing that's difficult is that they have a younger sibling who sometimes brings friends over without any warning. Actually, in general, bringing friends over isn't a problem at all. But For this person, it's extremely difficult when someone comes in without any notice. So they ask their sibling to let them know in advance before coming in or before the friends arrive who is coming and when. That way, they said they could prepare themselves a bit, but the sibling just couldn't understand that either. When the sibling asked, why is that even a problem? For this person, it was so serious that it made them feel suicidal. But to most people, it just seemed like they had a strange personality. So they called me and asked if I could talk to their parents about how difficult this was for them. So I wrote a long email to the parents saying that I would like to meet and talk together about their child. And when I wrote that email, I included something like this. If we have a child with poor eyesight, we can't tell just by looking at them, can we? But let's say this student says they can't see the writing on the blackboard, and someone next to them says, hey, just try a little harder. If you look carefully, you can see it. Why can't you see it? Sometimes people next to them keep pressuring them like that. But the truth is, even if this student wants to see, they can't because their eyesight is poor. But the people around think, there's no way a child could have poor eyesight, and keep pressuring the kid. Some even go as far as hitting them, telling them to open their eyes wide and look properly. Read that. But this student really can't see because of poor eyesight. So when someone has a physical disability, if their legs are weak, we give them crutches. And if their hands aren't functioning well, we provide other tools to help them. In the same way, if someone has poor eyesight, we should give them glasses. It's not right to just tell them to try hard to improve their eyesight. It's similar for your children as well. For example, if you don't understand why they insist on sorting things a certain way, or something like that, it's because when people with autism are extremely sensitive to routines. Even a slight deviation from their routine can be incredibly difficult for them, especially when they meet someone new. For the first time, they often feel a fear, as if that person might harm them. That's why it's important to understand your child. So whether it's parents or siblings, letting them know in advance or being a bit more mindful about sorting things can help. For most people, this is nothing at all. But for these friends with autism who experience it, it can feel like a matter of life and death. So it's extremely important to understand them. So as I just mentioned, people working in this field face a lot of difficulties. On the contrary, parents might think, the disability is so severe, and of course they worry. It's true that some of the children here have very severe and complex disabilities, which makes things quite difficult. But in reality, while the degree or nature of the difficulties may differ, people on this side also face many challenges. It's just that the nature of the difficulties is different. There are various challenges, each with its own character. In my view, there are times when I feel that the people here actually have it even harder. For those people, the government provides support, and things are handled in a straightforward way, because the needs for assistance are so clearly visible. But for the people here, their difficulties often aren't even apparent. Another characteristic of this group is that they have their own will. Because they have their own will, for example, if you say, the government offers this and that kind of support for disabilities, so why don't you try receiving it? They refuse. Why am I considered disabled? There's nothing wrong with me. There are people who reject help like this and say they don't mind being alone at all. So even if you try to help them build relationships with other people, there are many cases in this area where you simply can't because they refuse. That means there are situations where even parents want to help but are unable to do so. In fact, that makes things even more difficult. Later on, I'll talk more about this aspect, but ultimately, when it comes to making a diagnosis, it's about seeing where our child is. Depending on whether they're here, here, or here, the direction and methods of support that are needed will be different. So, next, what I want to talk about is what this diagnosis actually means.